Welcome to the New York Business Leaders Podcast, presented by the Coyle Group. We interview the most interesting and influential business leaders in New York and hear their stories of success, challenges, and lessons learned while building their businesses and personal brands. New episodes drop weekly, so please be sure to subscribe to get updates in your favorite stream. Without further delay, here's your host of the New York Business Leaders Podcast, Gordon Coyle.
Welcome back to the New York Business Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Gordon Coyle. In today's episode, I sit down with Gabe Phillips from Catalyst Power, which is a multifaceted solution provider to middle market firms in the clean energy space. It's an interesting conversation, especially today, given the changes we're seeing in energy and the need for more electricity in our grid. We talk about how small and medium-sized businesses can get into the energy game, how the Inflation Reduction Act provides incredible incentives for business owners to engage in these energy conversations, how unused rooftops can be a long-term asset play for businesses, and what the future of clean energy looks like in New York and beyond. The bottom line is that there are a lot of business owners of all sizes that just don't know how to capitalize on unused rooftops when it comes to energy generation. These business leaders probably think, do I install panels? Do I generate and use my own energy? Do I sell it back to the grid? How do I apply for subsidies? Who manages the process, et cetera, et cetera? It's all very confusing. And if you try to figure it out on your own, well, it just becomes overwhelming. And that's where Gabe's firm steps in to find the right solution for that particular business owner, that location, that building, and that particular situation. The cost of energy, especially in New York, isn't going down anytime soon. So finding a creative solution to managing capacity and costs is interesting, and that's the focus of this discussion. I have Gabe's contact info in the show notes, but check out his website, catalystpower.com, for more info. Now, if you have an interesting story that you'd like to tell on this podcast, why not reach out to me? My email is gbcoyle@thecoilegroup.com, and my direct dial is 845-474-2924, and I'll have that in the show notes as well. Thanks for listening, and now on to the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to the New York Business Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Gordon Coyle, and today I've got Gabe Phillips with me, who's the head of Catalyst Power. Interesting company, interesting value proposition. We're going to get into it. I'm going to start by just asking, well, first off, welcome, Gabe. Good to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you, just spend a couple of minutes, introduce yourself and your company, and explain what Catalyst Power does.
Absolutely. I'm Gabe Phillips, located in New York. Catalyst Power, although based here, is a virtual company, so we have teammates all over the country. That was our plan before COVID, and now it's just less weird. We are a decarbonization platform. We provide solutions to decarbonize middle market, commercial and industrial end-use customers. So that customer segment has been often ignored by energy solution providers, both renewable and non, and we thought that that was perverse and wanted to focus on that gap in the market. Some of our customers, like an example would be an asphalt producer in upstate New York. The owner of that independent business has more options for renewable energy supply and regular way energy supply at his home than he does for his business. And that was completely backwards, but we understand why that's the case. And we realized that if we brought to bear all the different solutions that one could provide to a customer with respect to their energy consumption and their carbon emissions on one platform, we can make it more efficient for that customer to both hear about, synthesize, and ultimately adopt the solutions that will help them save money, long-term budget have more long-term budget certainty, reduce their risk in the markets, which we all inherently have every day when we wake up in the morning, and provide themselves with a more resilient, localized grid. And that's the focus here at Catalyst Power. We got started in June of 2020, so a unique moment in time to found a new company. Our financial sponsor is BP Energy Partners, a private equity fund out of Dallas. That BP stood for Boone Pickens, not British Petroleum. Always helpful to clarify that.
Yes.
And they're focused on funding companies in the energy transition, which is exactly what Catalyst is focused on. And since we founded the business, we've made several acquisitions in the retail energy provider space so that we can roll up and gather up these commercial and industrial customers and then start to cross-market them a spectrum of solutions that go from lighter touch to more involved. So on the lighter touch front, a community solar subscription, for instance, we can unpack that in a moment. And then on the more involved side, actually hosting a solar array or a gas-fired backup generator, which collectively we call our connected microgrid solution, where we build, own, and operate a piece of equipment at their premises and sell them the energy or sell the energy to the utility or however that state's regulatory construct is set up. But we actually build the equipment at the customer site. We've got a little over 20 employees now. Everybody, for the most part, has come from the energy industry in one form or another. And we hope to continue to acquire books of customers to help to decarbonize them, through the retail energy provider world. And then, start to construct on our solar pipeline that we've been developing.
So a lot to unpack there. Tell us in layman's terms, the typical customer that you're working with and what you're doing for them. Maybe just breaking it down into an example would be good for the listeners and viewers.
Let's stick with the asphalt producer in upstate New York. This is a customer whom is an electricity customer of ours. So because of that relationship where we are predicting their consumption, going out into the market and procuring their electricity needs, that we have now a very in-depth insight into their consumption profile and their costs. That enabled my team, when scanning through our list of customers, to point out this particular one and say, hey, this guy's got a high cost of electricity and a high consumption. They've got a whole bunch of flat roofs that are eligible for solar. They're in a market, upstate New York, which still has incentives available for solar. Why don't we propose a hosted solar solution to them? Now, the sales cycle for something like that can typically be 18 to 24 months. So in the interim, how can we help decarbonize this customer as well? So we pitched to this customer that they subscribe to a community solar array and start saving money now as we work through the development process on developing an actual solar array on their roofs that will save them more money still and decarbonize them even further. And then ultimately, we'll be providing them with 3 products: retail electricity for the balance of their needs that are not produced by the solar array, solar production from our solar array that we own and operate on their rooftops, and then a community solar subscription that helps to offset their costs on the remaining power that they're not receiving from our solar array.
Okay, great example. And I think it shows that it's not just a single solution that a lot of people think, oh, I've got a small business or I've got a good-sized business, middle market, and I don't have enough roof space or I don't have enough yard space to put in a solar array or, in plain terms, panels that are going to generate electricity. So I really don't want to do it. Or, and I think a lot of consumers and business owners and business leaders, they don't understand what's involved in renewable PV sources. So they have a very narrow kind of sense of, I don't really want to get involved in putting panels on my roof. So let's just shift the conversation away from what's on premises to what you mentioned earlier, community-based solar, and how that integrates with this whole solution.
Absolutely. There's a bunch of states that provide the regulatory framework for community solar. In the Northeast, where we're operating today, for instance, New York, Massachusetts, Maryland, New Jersey. New Jersey's new, but all those other markets are more mature community solar markets. Ohio has upcoming legislation that will enable this as well. Illinois is more mature. That's been around a while, and there's many other states throughout the lower 48 that allow for this. And in a nutshell, there's a lot of similarities across the regulatory regime. So basically, it's a solar array that somebody builds within a utility service territory. And then, again, through the regulatory construct, customers within that same utility service territory can subscribe to that asset and receive benefits from it in a fractional nature. So here in New York, where we both are, it's actually got a quite elegant setup. If I build a solar array in National Grid's footprint, any customer throughout National Grid is eligible to subscribe for that. The array itself generates dollar credits with every kilowatt hour that it produces. And in order for that array owner the investor, the solar operator, to access that revenue, they have to have subscribers. And they, with each subscriber, elect a certain proportion of their dollar credits to be allocated to them. And then they say, hey, customer, I'm going to leave 10% of those with you, and I'm going to claw back 90%. That's how I make my revenue. That's how you get your benefit. Just like clipping a coupon. There's no downside for the customer. And that's essentially how community solar in New York works. And it's even more elegant here than in other states, where to claw back that 90%, the utilities actually are required to just net it out for me. So the utility leaves the 10% that I said the customer can keep with the customer as a bill credit on their bill. And then they just send me a wire for the other 90%. And that's it. In Massachusetts or New Jersey or Maryland, they got to get a separate invoice for that extra, the 90% that the solar array owner needs in order to have revenue, which does make it a little kludgy and confusing, and can be complicated at times. But New York's regime for this is extremely elegant. And why would a solar array owner want to participate in that versus just selling their power to the grid and getting wholesale pricing? It's because there's additional incentives available to the community solar developer from the state by making that asset a community solar asset versus just a utility scale solar project.
And is that in the form of a tax credit?
All solar gets a federal tax credit in the United States, and we could talk about the IRA and what it did for that, which is called ITC, the investment tax credit. But the New York incentive is actually an adder on the market revenues that it would otherwise earn for being a community solar project. And there's work involved with being a community solar project that you don't have to have if you're just a utility scale solar project selling your energy to the grid, right? You've got to go get customers and get them to sign subscription agreements. And then when they churn off, you have to add customers and manage that relationship. And further, there's more restrictions on what kind of customers you can sign up and how many. You can only have 40% of your array allocated to what's called a non-mass market customer. Really just a bigger one, like a larger customer with a demand meter that's over a certain size threshold. The rest of the array, the other 60%, you have to have mass market customers subscribed because they really want this product to be available to the broader community. You get additional adders if you go further and pinpoint customers that are low or moderate income, LMI. You get an additional adder for taking on the cost of marketing this and subscribing those customers, because that's a narrower focus on the customer means it's more costly to get to them and to subscribe them.
So in the case of the asphalt producer, we've got solar panels being installed at their premises, participation in the community solar program, and what was the third piece of it?
Retail energy supply.
So just regular electricity that they need when they're not producing it or the community grid isn't producing it. Correct.
And the utilities in New York, they price their rates based upon the spot market. It's got a lag, but they go up and down every day. In other states, depending on the state, they might re-rate every 6 months or every year, but those rates are still variable. They can move around. It's not like you've locked them in for any period of time. So a commercial industrial customer might value budget certainty. So this customer might want to sign a 3-year fixed price contract with us, or they might want some mixture of fixed and index in their contract, which is a more complex product to offer a middle market commercial customer. And you usually only see those things offered to very large, sophisticated end users with procurement teams, and analysis that they do internally and have a view on the markets and so forth. So we are also bringing these more sophisticated products down market to middle market customers who deserve access to them as well.
So I would imagine that just in this brief portion of the conversation, there's a lot of complexity that goes into this. It's just not, hey, I'm going to throw some panels up on my roof and cogen electricity, sell it back to the grid, and just call it a day. Nope. You're looking at a more end-to-end solution that has probably greater benefits to the client, not only in lower cost, but they're lowering their carbon footprint. They're doing something for the environment. They're creating some sustainability in their energy profile and all that sort of stuff. Is that kind of the package that you're talking about?
Yeah. And further, I should just note that they don't have to reach into their pocket to do any of that.
All right, let's talk about that, because for a business, that's a big piece. I'm surprised I missed that.
Yeah.
So how do they do that and get all the benefits without having to put their hand in their pocket?
We build, own, and operate the equipment that we propose for our customers to host.
Got
They
it.
have to enter into a contract with us to buy the electricity that we produce. That's called a PPA, a power purchase agreement.
Mm-hmm.
Set the first year's rate at their current all-in avoided costs. So all the different cost components that we help them avoid by generating power on site, which includes some charges from the utility as well as their supply charges from us. And then we discount that today. It depends on the market and the incentives, but sometimes it's as high as 20 or 30%. And then we lock in their rate and with an inflationary escalator for a 20-year contract. Now, the problem for many middle market commercial industrial customers that are entrepreneurs or independent business owners like myself is that they don't sign like a longer than a 5-year lease, let alone a 20-year power purchase agreement, right? They can't lock in their insurance costs for more than a year at a time, Gordon, right? Something you're familiar with.
Right.
And so it's difficult to plan for 20-year commitments like that. So we try to make it as easy for the customer to say yes to that as possible by reducing the size of our proposed solar arrays to only producing 20, 30, or 40% of their needs. And the rest of their needs, they can buy in those shorter term commitment contracts that they're more accustomed to. We don't want them to put all their supply eggs in one basket. And that also provides some optionality for them and for us in the future, because who knows what the world will invent that's decarbonizing and cheaper than solar is today. Maybe they'll come up with a fusion generator. I don't know. But if it's financeable and simple enough to engineer, then we'll own and operate them and propose that to the same customer in the future. So we like having that open volume, and I think it's easier for the customer to get comfortable with the long-term commitment. There are other ways we help get them comfortable with a long-term commitment. We could flip it around and just reduce their risk at all and just lease their roof from them and create a small community solar project.
Got it.
And we could subscribe them to it and then subscribe the rest out to their community. And then that way their commitment is to receive money for 20 years, not to pay it. And in some cases, that's a lot easier for an independent business owner to get behind, even though it does provide slightly less benefit economically. And certainly from an ESG perspective, they can't claim that they're consuming the energy because they're not. They're just hosting the project. But it still looks good. It's on their roof. And if their customers care about it, then they could say, look, we did that. We're the reason that exists.
What's the typical energy spend a client needs to have in order to start thinking about a solution like what you're providing?
I don't think about it in terms of the dollar spend. It's more about the annual consumption. It's usually around 1 million kilowatt hours. In some cases, a little less. We can make it work on a smaller array, depending on where they are. Of total annual consumption. What they spend on that depends on where market rates are and stuff like that at the time.
Right. And so I'm thinking about a handful of clients that I have. So if it's food manufacturing, as an example, huge rooftops, solar array opportunities, but a lot of their energy consumption is in natural gas. Is there anything that crosses over there from your solution set to natural gas?
So many interesting topics associated with that. Right now, even I was reading in the paper this morning that a lot of lobbyists are gearing up in Washington for a potential change of control of the House and starting to fight against the Biden administration's effort to electrify a lot of home heating, which is done with natural gas.
Right.
So one thing that dovetails with our business that a natural gas consumer should think about always is electrifying their natural gas consumption, however they do that. So electric heaters, electric water heaters, it depends on what their process is, right? If they're a food manufacturer that's got a steam loop or something like that, then maybe electric production of that steam is what they should consider, especially with gas prices for this upcoming winter, trading in New York around $30 a decatherm. Just to put that into context, in the past it was like $5 in New York. At Henry Hub in Louisiana, it's $5.40 now, but used to be like $3. So these are huge disparities from historical gas pricing. And I think a lot of folks who are unaware of that are going to have a rude awakening this coming winter. But the other way that we interact with gas consumers is through our gas supply, which we offer as a net zero gas product. So we'll sell you natural gas, but we're going to buy carbon offsets as part of that and convey them to you as part of our contract in a bundled product. So you're buying carbon neutral natural gas from us. So if you got somebody who's concerned about their environmental footprint, but can't seem to get away from the natural gas consumption requirements of their inherent within their business process, they can at least go ahead and get carbon neutral with us.
Interesting. And I'm thinking about, in a variety of different customer profiles where natural gas is used, some of that could be, reconstituted as electrified power to, create steam and heat. In others, I think, thinking like a paper mill, uses a tremendous amount of energy to fire huge boilers to dry paper products and things like that. So it's so let's this is probably a natural transition to go into the Inflation Reduction Act and what happens with taxes. And I'm not very well versed in that, but how does the Biden's Joe Biden's bill on clean energy impact a lot of these decisions for business owners?
So the investment tax credit, sorry, let me take a step back. How does solar incentives work is probably like a quick overview that would be helpful. So there are federal incentives, and then there are state level incentives. There are cost reducing incentives, and then there are revenue producing incentives. Okay, so the federal incentives are tax credit driven. So there's the federal investment tax credit, which before the IRA was stepping down to 22% and phasing out, which was very difficult for solar developers to understand how they were going to be able to make their projects financeable in the future. The IRA moved that up to 30% and for 10 years. So lots of stability in that very important incentive for solar. The other incentive is accelerated depreciation at the federal level, another tax benefit where you've got 100% bonus depreciation. There are other adders for these different incentives that you could get access to if you buy American, if you use certain types of labor, if you have customers that are, or if you're a host that's low and moderate income. There's a lot of other adders, as well as distressed municipalities and stuff like that. So still waiting for the Treasury Department to clarify a lot of these things at the moment. But the baseline is the ITC moved up to 30% and stayed there for 10 years. And that is tremendous for stability and for our ability to drive down the cost of solar for customers. At the state level, it's a mixed bag all over the place. So in New York, we have a rebate program that's called New York Sun, where over the course of the first couple of years of the project's life, we get some checks from NYSERDA. It depends on where you are and how large of an array you build, what level of incentives those checks look like. And then you also, as a community solar provider, get an adder on your revenue. So that's another way that there's solar incentives that are, that work in the state of New York. In New Jersey, you had solar renewable energy credits that you would sell on the open market that were revenue driving, revenue producing incentives. Every state's regime is different. And of course, they change pretty frequently. So for us, we have to have a lot of geographic diversification so that we always have something we can do in each market as the incentives materialize and then disappear, materialize and disappear. It's sort of cyclical. So that's one way in which the IRA has created a tailwind for the solar industry, but also great for the middle market consumer, because it was marginal whether it was like an economic benefit before to go solar, and now it's way less marginal. It's like an obvious economic benefit. The problem becomes bandwidth. Can I give this developer the attention that they need to put a project together and to review their documents? And can I get comfortable with the commitments I need to make? That all takes a long time from a distracted business owner that's running their business all day, every day. So it helps with that process by making it cheaper, but it's still not the cure-all. We really need incentives that pinpoint middle market C&I customers. They're the engine of our economy, right? They're the biggest employers in the country. And lo and behold, they're like one of the biggest emitters of carbon in the country as well, that customer segment. And they also own all these rooftops that do nothing for them. And, unfortunately, we see a lot of solar developers clearing valuable forest lands to build large solar arrays because certain incentives sort of, geared towards that. But we should really rejigger our incentive structures in each state or federally to provide a bigger benefit for rooftop solar for commercial industrial customers, because that's going to help business owners, their employees, the overall local economy. It's obviously a win-win-win that I'm hoping that the regulators start to realize they need to focus more on.
And on top of all of that, we have this fundamental problem that the existing electrical grid cannot provide sufficient power to all of its customers. And especially if we start to transition more to electrified, home heating, home cooking, industrial heating, industrial cooking, or industrial use where natural gas is being used because of the carbon issue. And, I read somewhere that if everybody got an electric vehicle, there wouldn't be enough electricity on the grid to charge all those cars. If that's the direction this country is heading in, which I think is positive, we need to produce more electricity. And I think we need to produce clean electricity. And you're kind of plugging into a solution, not to use a pun, but, that is very viable. And with current tax credit seems to be an ideal situation for a middle market business owner.
Everybody always uses the word catalyst in a pun with me. I'm shocked that you didn't go there. That's like always what I get.
I'll get to it.
I deserve it for calling it business that, but that's typically what I expect. So there's two different kinds of generation interconnections, right, to the grid itself. One is a utility scale interconnection, which is at the high voltage system. It's like the centralized power generation model, right? Versus Tesla debate from way back when, versus the distributed generation model where you're connecting a generator behind the fence, like at the point of consumption. And we've sort of maxed out what we can do with centralized generation in this country, and allowing the poles and wires to carry that through the distribution system to where it needs to go. That was what your point was, I think, earlier, is that if we put all these energy sucking batteries, from cars on the grid all at the same time during the day, at night, I think, timing is important in electricity. It's not something we're at the moment, at least in mass. Then you're right. We'd be running into peakers, or having blackouts. So where can we produce more electricity where we need it? And that's through the distributed generation deployment. And that's what we're focused on. And that is actually what the utilities tend to call a non-wires solution. Instead of beefing up the grid, fixing their wires, fixing transformers and stuff like that, if customers all built on-site generation resources like solar, like little batteries, like some gas-fired backup generation they could use to peak shave and things like that, then we're going to have a much more resilient grid that can handle the increased electrification that we're all calling for. It's an easier path to decarbonization if we use electricity versus burning fuel on site, because we can distribute easily renewable resources, and then we have the more efficient thermal resources that are larger and central. So we get the best of both worlds that way if we do electrify, instead of having very inefficient gas consumption that burns gas in small engines sort of all over the country, right? Because it's easy to slap solar panels on the roof as long as the customer is willing to host it.
And so we've talked about rooftop panels a lot in this conversation. So who are typical customer profiles, typical businesses that you're targeting, that you want to talk to, that are, have either the rooftops or the fields or the ability to install panels on?
Sure. And, we will look at ground mounts. It's just got to be not like land that I have to remove valuable ecosystems in order to put solar on.
Right.
I think there are ways that they can coexist, and I'm seeing some really innovative stuff happening out there, like in farmland typically. But I'm not going to go clear, valuable forests, which are necessary as our, world's lungs, right? To build solar. So typically I talk about it on roof, but it could be like, in an unused parking lot or industrial, land that's brownfield, right? And the typical customers there, commercial real estate owners, warehouses, manufacturers, data centers, guys without busy roofs, are great candidates for solar. Anyone who's doing sort of industrial, we don't care as much about what's happening below the roof, except for the credit of the customer. That's important to us. And many of these independent businesses have great credit. They're just hard to underwrite. So we got to do work to underwrite their credit like a commercial lender would. And that's actually another big part of our business, is underwriting customer credit. We can't sell somebody 20 years worth of power that we don't think is going to be there in 20 years. So we do have to take credit risk there, and we have to analyze it and make sure we're doing it responsibly. That's why you tend to see solar developers gravitate to the bookends of the world. The residential solar consumer, very easy to underwrite. You just look at their FICO score. And then the public company that's got publicly rated balance sheets, very easy to underwrite because I'm just pointing to their rating. It's everybody in between that's the hard one. And it's hard to get to them. It's hard to convince them. It's hard to sell them multiple things like we're doing all at once. And it's also hard to underwrite their credit. But we put all of that on one platform and we make it easier for everybody involved.
And I think you mentioned it earlier. One of the most difficult things that I even experience is getting them to focus. This is your sale, like my sale is they have to have insurance. Your sale is they know what they buy already, and maybe they're going to be in for a shock this year on natural gas consumption, but they have to change, they have to wrap their mind around a totally different process, product, delivery. It's like I can imagine that's a tough, long-tailed sale.
It is, yeah. We help to make it less expensive for us to deliver on that by selling them something that they need first, their electricity, right? They got to have it. They got to go with a rational product from a rational supplier that gives them a benefit versus sitting with the utility. And that's our core business. That's how we got started. Companies that do that are typically, the disaggregated group of companies that do that have been, good acquisition targets for us. We've been acquiring books of those customers for the last year and a half or so through the retail energy supply businesses that we've acquired or retail energy brokerage businesses that we've acquired. And so we start there. That's our relationship is initiated with the customer. Mm-hmm. And it gives us so much insight into their spend that we can help them get their head wrapped around these other opportunities much more efficiently than the solar developer off the street who says, hey, can you send me your last 2 years worth of bills so I can tell you, what I could propose? I don't need that. I've got it already. Because I'm a licensed retail supplier, I can access the historical data. They give me authorization to do that, obviously, but I can access that through the utility portals or EDI, the communication that we have with the utility. Or if I'm already serving their needs, I see it. I know exactly what their costs are and their consumption profile. So it makes it much more efficient for us to offer those other solutions. And we're already their trusted partner in helping to reduce their cost and exposure to market gyrations.
So we talked about industrial customers. What about office buildings, apartment buildings, things like that?
Sure. We're working with multifamily building owners in the 5 boroughs in New York City right now to help them leverage solar to comply with Local Law 97. It's a new emissions reduction requirement in New York City. Anyone who's got a roof and got, in the right incentive market, we tend to be able to propose a solution to. Unfortunately, parking canopies are impossible to make economically work right now because of the price of steel. And I really hope that changes in the future because it's another really untapped solar resource out there, right? All those parking lots that just reflect heat into the environment. Can you imagine if instead they were consuming that salinity and producing renewable electricity? Mm-hmm. That would be much better. But the price of steel is making that totally uneconomic. But yeah, commercial real estate owners, they could be our landlord. We can lease their roofs the same way that the tenants underneath that roof lease the space, and we can monetize their solar production other ways instead of having to ink contracts with their short-term tenants. That's a pretty complicated thing to try to figure out how to do. So a commercial real estate owner, you can just lease me your roof the same way you lease below the space below the roof.
Mm-hmm. And is the market that you're in very competitive? Are there a lot of providers going to these building owners having this conversation, or are they kind of disjointed and different from each other?
The solution providers tend to focus on those bookends I mentioned before. They ignore the middle market commercial industrial customer, and that's why we're focused on them. They're hard to get to. They're distracted. All those reasons that we've talked about.
Yep.
Right. But we are trying to make this as easy for them as possible by bringing to bear all of these things onto one platform. And that's what's not novel about Catalyst Power. No one else has done that today.
And where do you generally operate? Is it in the New York metro area?
So we have regulatory licensing requirements each deregulated state that we need to operate in. So since we're relatively new still, a little over 2 years old, we are operating in New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. We're soon going to launch Pennsylvania and Ohio, New Jersey, Maryland, and DC, and then eventually Illinois will launch as well.
Great. Interesting, really very interesting stuff. And it can get a little complicated, but I think you made it very understandable for a business owner. I mean, you made it understandable for me. And I think that the options that you can provide to a customer, whether it's entering into a long-term contract where they buy the energy or they just lease you the roof space, I think those are all kind of really interesting propositions. Now, I would imagine that whether it's a lease or they're buying it, that becomes an asset that the business owner can leverage in the future.
So if they're leasing me their roof, then it's a payment stream. It enhances the value of their property or their business. It's a revenue. It's not usually a very high one, but it's a revenue stream where there was none before. So we actually find ourselves competing there with like cell tower siting companies and stuff like that for the roof space. But if it's a power purchase agreement, the problem for a lot of business owners is that, well, what if I'm overpaying in 10 years? What if like we build so much wind and solar in America that rates go down instead of up, which they traditionally do? Netting all things being, all added, like including distribution and transmission charges from the utility. The likelihood of that occurring over a long period of time is pretty low, but there's a risk. So, maybe the lease is a better option for them, or they want to own that upside. And if rates skyrocket, my price doesn't skyrocket, right? I've committed to a contract with them. So they own all the upside on future savings. So those are other considerations that they have to get their heads wrapped around.
Interesting. I'm looking at my other screen at the notes that we've traded back and forth. Is there anything that I've really missed in this conversation that you wanted to cover?
I think what's important to note is that the only commitment from the customer here that is required is a little bit of their time. They don't have to financially commit to anything. People ask me, what's the ROI on my going solar? I tell them it's infinite. You put no capital up. It's infinity. You have these choices you have to make on different contract structures and value that you want to avail yourself of, right? Is it a fixed price power purchase agreement where I own the upside on savings with a little downside on costs going down? Or do I want to lease my roof to these guys and have a revenue stream? Do I simply just want to, subscribe to a community solar array so I can have a shorter term commitment without, tying up my building in some way? All of these are great solutions for the C&I customer to go out and find and get, but there's nobody really marketing it to them besides us. If you're a middle market commercial industrial customer, you want to know just what your options are, go to catalystpower.com. Give us a shout. That's the best way. We are very happy to walk anybody through it and just remind them that the commitment is low. It's just time.
Yeah, and I think that I can kind of think here in the back of my head the objections from customers in talking about this idea, but virtually there's really no downside. I mean, like you said from the beginning, everybody needs power to run their business. Where are you going to buy that power? How are you going to, you don't know what the future of that cost is going to be. So if you can control it to some degree and have some benefit from controlling that cost, then it makes sense to have this conversation. I think that's really just the bottom line.
That's key. We're putting the control back into the customer's hands where in the past they never had it.
Good. Gabe, it's been an interesting conversation. If somebody wanted to get in touch with you, how's the best way to do that?
catalystpower.com.
Okay.
Or shoot me an email, Gabe, Gabe, @catalystpower.com.
Great. Gabe, it's been a great conversation. Thank you for being with us today. Folks, if you want to learn more, I just encourage you to reach out to Gabe and have a conversation. It certainly doesn't cost you anything to do that. It's not what I do for a living, but you don't have to be a genius to figure out that electricity, natural gas, power to run your business is an issue today, and it's going to continue to be an issue for as long as time goes on, and we've got to have some solutions. And this sounds like a very interesting opportunity to kind of get in early and do something about it for your company. So thanks again for being on. If you have an interesting story, if you're watching or listening and you have an interesting story that you'd like to tell on this podcast, contact me. My name is Gordon Coyle. I'll have my contact info in the show notes as well. And until next time, thanks for watching and listening. I'll see you soon. Bye.
Thanks, Gordon.
That's it for this week's episode of the New York Business Leaders Podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss next week's episode. In the meantime, find more interviews and resources at nybusinessleaders.com.